Good morning. Do you know it's Friday? We are in this strange time, aren't we, where at least many of us, and myself somewhat included, kind of lose track of what day it is because there is not this regular rhythm and routine of our weeks and our weekends. But today's Friday, and it is Friday, April 17th, and just coming to you this morning. So, hi, Dottie and Antonita. Good to see both of you. Hi, Virgil. So I just wanted to come to you as I have been for the last many weeks. It's just been a joy to be able to join together with you every morning and to just share some things that God is showing me as I spend time in His Word and in prayer every morning. And today I want to share a couple things that probably should be unpacked over several messages because it's probably way too much for a quick little morning devotion, but we'll start here and probably unpack it later as we move forward. But one of the things that I have been thinking about, and it actually comes out of yesterday's live stream prayer, awakening prayer event that happened with our worship leader, who's also the director of communications and the head of the National Prayer Ministry, Brett Heinzman. And then he got together with J.D. Walt and David Johnson from Seedbed and the New Room Conference. And one of the things they were talking about is in this time of COVID that we can consider ourselves in diaspora. We are set apart and spread away from the church. And while the circumstances are certainly not the same, we could debate whether what led up to being into diaspora, whether that is similar to what we see in the Old Testament, the situation where we find ourselves of being unable to be in our church buildings, being challenged with thinking differently about what it means to be the church today. I really like that metaphor of thinking about us being in diaspora. And so as I was thinking about that last night and this morning, the scripture from Jeremiah 29 came to mind. Judah has been exiled and they are in Babylon. And if you're familiar at all with scripture, you know that Babylon is always talked about as this evil, horrible place to be. And as you might imagine, Judah is longing to return to the promised land, and they are just itching to get back. They can't wait. If they had calendars on the wall, they'd be counting down the days. But the thing was, they didn't know when they were returning. And very similar to us, we don't know when we're going to be returning to quote unquote normal. But God doesn't say, well, just hold on and you'll get through this really quickly. He says something really interesting to Jeremiah, and I think that it would behoove us to listen and to consider how his words might apply to us today. So Jeremiah 29, starting in verse 4, it says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." And this is the instructions that he gives to Jeremiah to give to the people of God who are in exile. "Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce." Now we might read that and go, oh, okay, that's they need somewhere to eat. They need something to eat. They need somewhere to live. But building a house takes some time. Planting gardens takes some time. You don't plant a tomato seed one day and then the next day go out and harvest a tomato. And so God is saying, you're going to be here a while, so you may as well put down roots and settle in. And as he continues talking about what the people of God are to do, he says, "Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." And when God says, pray for the peace of the city, that's shalom. So we're not talking about just the absence of violence. We are talking about God's perfection spreading throughout the entire city. So this is a return from the brokenness and the sinfulness to God's original intention, to the perfection that we see at creation. And so God says, pray for that. Pray for that peace, that shalom, to envelop the city. Now, remember, this was an evil city. Babylon was the last place that you would want to be. And God says, pray for its peace, pray for its prosperity. So you might be thinking, what in the world does that have to do with us today? Well, I know that many of us, most of us, I would even say, are getting antsy. We're getting antsy to return to normal. We're getting antsy to go back to work and go back to school and go back to having the freedom to be able to do what we want to do, how we want to do it, when we want to do it. We're getting antsy to return back to the way things were before. Certainly, we miss that freedom, miss being able to engage with our children or grandchildren, interacting with people at work, interacting with people at church. For sure, there's a lot that's being missed. But I want to challenge us individually and corporately. Individually, we can choose to how we're going to engage this time of being in diaspora, being in Babylon, if you will. We can choose to just endure it and get through it as fast as we can. Count down the days on the calendar and just long for that day when we get to the end of it. Or we can ask God to teach us and show us what it is that he wants to do with us, in us, through us at this time. I was thinking about seminary, and when I was going through seminary, there was a real temptation to simply get through the classes, do the schoolwork, turn it in, still do very, very well, and yet not let it impact my heart and my spirit. I could do all of the work, and in fact, the teachers, the professors wouldn't actually probably know in most cases that I hadn't allowed it to impact me. But thankfully, there were professors and my cohort members who we encouraged each others to stay accountable to not just doing the schoolwork, not just completing the assignments, but allowing God to work in us throughout the process of seminary. And I'm very thankful. Now, I didn't always do that. There were times, there were weeks, there were even classes where I simply got through the work and got it accomplished and marked it off on my list. But when I was able to really settle in and allow God to work, the material for the class was valuable for sure. But what God did in me and in amongst our cohort, that was what was most important. And I think that we can look at our time right now with this COVID quarantine in much of the same way. Are we going to just endure and just get through it, count down the days, or are we going to invite God to be in it? And are we going to invite God to teach us and impact us and grow us and challenge us and move us in these moments? I want to encourage you that we would be asking regularly, God, what do you want to show me? What are you teaching me now? How am I going to be different on the other side of this? What is going to happen differently in my life, in my family's life, because of this time? And how, God, do you want to be working right now to move us in that direction? Because I have often said and will continue to say that if we come out of this time the same as when we went in, then we've missed a huge opportunity. We've missed a time that God is saying, you know what, I'm going to set aside some things. I'm going to pull you out of normal. I'm going to pull you away from what is comfortable so that we can learn and grow. And if we miss all that, I think it's going to be a huge disappointment, at least for me. And so I want to encourage you and challenge you to think that way for yourselves. In terms of a larger group, as far as the church or your family, while God certainly wants to, and we can invite him into this time and to teach us, I also want to think about and remind ourselves that although this time of quarantine and isolation is not comfortable, it's not enjoyable, we're missing things, that it also is a wonderful opportunity for us to demonstrate love for each other and to demonstrate really truly what it means to care about the least of these. Because while it might not directly impact us, our staying in isolation, our staying in quarantine means that we're protecting those who are more vulnerable among us. And having been through COVID, I can tell you that it's a nasty virus, and we do not want our beloved young people, older people, anybody to have to walk through that themselves. I have had 2 different doctor friends post in the last 24 hours their concerns that we're itching to get back to normal too quickly. And they both said that releasing the restrictions and the guidelines and going back to normal when the peak starts flattening. One said it's like stopping your antibiotics when you start feeling better. You know that, right? You go to the doctor, you get a dose of antibiotics, and they say take the entire thing. Don't stop it just because you start feeling better, because the virus can actually grow and it can attack your body even more so. So one of my doctor's friends said, it's like stopping your antibiotics when you start feeling better, but before you finish that. My other doctor friend said going back to normal and releasing the restrictions just when the peak is flattening, which is what we're coming up to in many states, is like cutting off your parachute when it starts slowing you down. Saying, oh, I'm good, I don't need my parachute anymore. And so I just want to hear that and just be encouraged that this is the time, 1, to invite God to be working in us and in our families in this time, and 2, just to be reminded of God's words to Jeremiah about how it is that we are to seek the peace, the shalom of the city during these times. And that means valuing others and their health and their well-being above our own wishes and desires. And so that's a difficult place to be, but God calls us and empowers us to be that place and those people in these times. So I just want to encourage you with that. May we be the ones who are on the lookout for how it is that we can come alongside those who are struggling in these times. It's perhaps easier for some of us who still have jobs to be able to say, oh, we need to slow down and not return back to normal because we're not as impacted. And so how can we, those who are not as impacted quite as negatively as others who have lost jobs, how can we come alongside those who are severely impacted in these days so that we can be the hands and feet of Christ in encouraging, supporting, and just hands-on ministering and loving our neighbors and our friends. I'm not sure what that looks like in your community, but I would encourage you to think about and talk about and coordinate together to respond to that very real challenge. Well, lots of stuff on my mind this morning. I hope that it speaks to you where you're at. I don't intend at all to minimize the challenge and the difficulty that we find ourselves in, but hopefully having a broader perspective about seeking the shalom of the city, the time that it takes, and inviting God to be in the midst of where we find ourselves will help us forestall our despairing at getting back to normal. There will be a time when we return, and it will be much sweeter if we do it at the right time rather than too early, because otherwise we're going to be right back where we are now, but even worse. Well, God bless you. I'm praying for you. I hope that this weekend might be a bit of a change of routine and schedule for your family, that to come together, play some games, watch movies together, go for a walk, enjoy each other's company in these times, and wash your hands, and we will check in with you tomorrow. Take care.